now for some political analysis. Jerry Seib is the executive Washington editor at the Wall Street Journal. Rachael Bade covers Congress for Politico, is also a CNN political analyst. Ben Domenech is the founder and publisher of The Federalist, and David Nakamura covers the White House for The Washington Post. Rachel, I want to start with you because when we were speaking with Congressman Gowdy, he mentioned some of your reporting at Politico. I asked him about whether he'd sign on to impeach Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. He said, for what?
Really telling answer right there. And I think it really highlights this quiet divide we're seeing going on right now between Republicans on the Hill, between Republicans like Gowdy, who want the Russia investigation to continue. Yes, they're concerned about some bias with a couple of FBI agents, but overall, they want to hold Russia accountable for election interference. And then the Trump allies on Capitol Hill that are listening to the president. They see this as a witch hunt, and they want it to go away. And so, for instance, on Friday, right when Rod Rosenstein was up announcing, these 12 indictments of Russians, just a few minutes before, conservative Mark Meadows, who leads the House Freedom Caucus, actually had a red folder in his hand on the House floor that would basically impeach Rosenstein, and he's trying to get support for that. And they want this investigation to go away, and so you're seeing different Republicans clash. I think that Gowdy is a bellwether for a lot of Republicans because he is very close with leadership. So I would listen to what he says in terms of whether or not this would go through, and it seems unlikely.
Ben, I'm going to pigeonhole you as representative of all Republicans here in some way.
I'm not even a Republican.
I know. But no, in your work and your research. But
sure.
Picking up on what Rachel's saying, this divide from within, and the efforts to muddy the water.
I do think that there is a divide. I think the divide that Rachel is talking about is accurate. Part of the issue here is kind of the change that's happened in the nature of these indictments. When we originally had these indictments come out in February, they were primarily targeted at social media activity, memes, ads, and fake news that Russian activity was promoting here. Now you're getting something that's more serious, which is actual activity on the part of Russians to phish into DNC servers to try to get emails out of the various people involved there. And the implication of these latest indictments is that the next step for this Mueller investigation is going to be looking at some of the issues that Victoria Nuland was talking about earlier, concerns about the state-level actions of Russians that could have targeted secretaries of state and voting processes. That, I think, needs to be the utmost concern at this point. We can relitigate what happened in 2016 and how much it actually mattered, but what really matters going forward for the confidence of the American people is confidence in the upcoming midterm elections and what that looks like. Republicans, I think, would be much wiser to be engaged on that point as opposed to fighting these kind of internally divisive wars.
Jerry, when it comes to the president's meeting with Vladimir Putin, he seems to be saying, this is in the past. Yeah. Now it's about my relationship with Vladimir Putin. Why does he need to bring up this meddling?
Well, I think, it's perfectly clear from what Senator Cornyn said, for example. Republicans are saying, look, this is an attack on the United States. It needs to be addressed as such. And I think that the reason to have a meeting is so that you can bring that sort of thing up. I think, one of the interesting things about the indictment was it actually may have been beneficial for the president that it came out before the meeting because it means that he has a reason to raise this with Vladimir Putin. I think it would have been much worse for the president if he had had this meeting and said some conciliatory things about how I don't think the Russians really did this, and then the indictment had come out later. That would have looked terrible. It would look as if he has been sandbagged. As it is now, he has no recourse except to raise it, and Vladimir Putin knows that it's going to be raised. I think it'll be fascinating, as you suggested earlier, what's this going to be like at a press conference tomorrow where they're both standing up side by side, and this is going to be topic A on the list. I don't know how that's going to go, but I don't think it's bad for the president that this is out there because it's clear he has to raise it.
But Jerry's right, he has to raise it. He raised it last year in his first meeting with Putin at the G20, but then said, look, he denied it. What can I do? I had to move on. That he's already said that leading up to this meeting
No Perry Mason moment.
The no Perry Mason moment. Looking at Jeff Glor's interview with the president you played earlier, in one paragraph, the president used the word disgrace 6 times in relation to this investigation and Peter Strzok's testimony last week. 2 times he used witch hunt, once rigged and one partisan. That's 9 different times using words like that in one paragraph to talk about this. This does not seem like a president who's really going there to really hold Putin accountable. And if you look, Trump says, I want to get in a room with these leaders, even if they're geopolitical foes or rivals or enemies, like Kim Jong-un. But with Kim Jong-un, he had a real strong strategy of pressure, maximum pressure, rallying world allies, rallying other countries. Here he went to NATO and had this disruptive moment, seemed to divide NATO right before this meeting. It's very different. We don't even know what his real agenda is with Putin.
And I think it's interesting that one of the things the critics keep pointing out is that when the president talks about this, what's missing is some statement of outrage about what the Russians did. It's in the interview he says it's the Democrats' fault because they didn't have adequate computer defenses up, and it happened on Obama's watch. I think what people are looking for in many cases here is some statement of outrage from the president of the United States, not about what happened to him, but what happened to the country.
And that is kind of a stand-in for the fact that these indictments, even as significant as they are ultimately toothless. I mean, Jeff Glor obviously asked him about whether he would bring up the possibility of extraditing the individuals named. I'm sorry, but that just seems very fanciful to me. We have no extradition relationship with Russia, and so that essentially the rhetoric is a stand-in for doing something that actually matters.
David, this complaint at NATO about paying more for your own defense is something we've heard president after president after president. With President Trump, what is it that Americans should know is different here? Why is it a problem when he says it the way he says it?
Well, look, the president has been very critical of the allies on trade, on immigration, and now on this defense spending. What is interesting with Trump, though, is that he tends to sort of escalate some sort of problem where a problem may exist, whether it's North Korea's nuclear weapons or this issue of collective defense spending, to a higher level, and then tries to sort of swoop in at the last minute and sort of make a deal or create some sort of pressure or take some action or dramatic step and look like he solved some sort of problem. And he seems to have employed this again here, as he did with the Singapore summit with Kim Jong-un, where we don't know that he's made that much of a difference, but he sort of says at the end, I was threatening to leave, I was threatening NATO, and now they're coming around, they're going to spend more, even though these nations did promise ahead of time, even before he took office, to start spending more.
Rachel, if your memory is long enough and you can recall what happened on Monday, we did get a Supreme Court nominee.
Yes, yeah.
And you heard Senator Cornyn say he thinks he can flip 3 Democrats.
Right, and actually one thing that's particularly interesting, Cornyn apparently cornered the minority leader, Chuck Schumer, in the Senate gym the other day when he was on an exercise bike and was like, good luck getting out of this one. Look, Republicans, they actually, they're going to get a victory here. And not just because they're seeming united behind their appointee, but also because Democrats are not united on this. There are about half a dozen Democrats from states that Trump carried in the 2016 election that are on the ballot this fall, and they see potentially the politics are better for them to ignore Schumer and to potentially vote for this nominee. I think one person to watch, for instance, is Joe Manchin, who's from West Virginia. It's a state that Trump carried by 40 points. And earlier this week, one of my colleagues caught up with him in the hall and said to him, can Schumer twist your arm to get you to vote against this nominee? And he said, quote, I'll be 71 years old in August. You're going to whip me, being Schumer, kiss my you-know-what. So it's going to be an issue for Schumer.
Well, plus, I mean, Democrats may be better off letting these people vote and win the next election.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately, because we're out of time. We're not out of news, but we'll be right back.